This is Aaron Fritz as your host this week, and I'm excited to introduce our guest this week, Dr. John Lipman. John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. I really enjoy what you guys are doing.
Thank you, John. Longtime listeners probably remember your episode 72, where you were with Chris Beck discussing your UFI practice. And in that episode, you did touch upon how unique your practice is in the Atlanta area. And today I wanted to kind of focus a bit on the story of how you got to where you are, since it is rather unique. And at the time was probably considered by many a big risk. But yet here we are today where many people are trying to do just what you've done successfully. But before we get into that, John, I just want you to give a real quick intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've been, and then we'll get to where you are now.
Well, I've been practicing for a little over 30 years now. I trained at Georgetown, and then I did my radiology residency at Brigham and Women's, then did a 1-year interventional fellowship at Yale with Robert White and Don Denny. And then I came to Atlanta, and in a suburban practice, very typical private practice group in Atlanta. And I practiced there for about 14 years before I struck out on my own 17 years ago.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about that. So from what I remember from the episode with Chris, you said that you started your OBL back in 2015, but tell us even before then what you were doing on your own back, I think as early as 2004, you said?
Right. I mean, that was really the impetus to, I was used to a strong clinical, having a clinic. And, as I say, Robert White was, like Barry Katzen, very clinically emphasis, we had a clinic as a fellow. And when I took my private practice job, I kind of assumed that's what it was going to be like, that I'd be able to have my own clinic. And it was quite a battle with the non-interventional colleagues who were not supportive at all of having a clinic. They just wanted you to meet the patient in the hallway and do what's on the board. And so it was a big struggle to get them finally, after years being, I was a partner and you had a little bit more say, but still getting outvoted constantly on any kind of initiative for IR. But clinic was really important to me, and I just didn't want to compromise on that. And so finally, I just kind of had it and said that I was going to strike out on my own and be a solo interventional radiologist. I think they thought I was pretty crazy to do that. They assumed I was leaving the area, but I stayed in Atlanta, and I had talked to referral sources and made sure that, I think this is something that I can do. Unfortunately, I didn't really have anybody to kind of talk this over with. I kind of took a proverbial leap, but it certainly worked out. And, in retrospect, hindsight, I wish I had the nerve to have done it 5 or 6 years earlier.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That was back in 2004, you said.
Correct. Yeah. And so that I was in an area that kind of focused on UFE. That's certainly what kind of had a name in Atlanta for doing UFE. And I provided the interventional service at a hospital that didn't have any IR. In fact, they were an LTAC hospital. So they were spending lots and lots of money, over $100,000 a year, to transport respirator dependent patients to the main hospital 30 minutes north of where we were to do the silliest things, the most mundane intervention, thoracentesis, paracentesis, but they packed them up and it cost them huge amounts of money. So when this hospital lost their emergency room, I knew the CEO of this big hospital system, and this hospital was the smallest in their universe. And I knew the CEO, and he knew me, and he knew of my plans to leave my practice, my private practice group, and said, he basically said, if you come to this hospital, we'll build you what do you need? And I said, well, you need an angio suite, I need an MRI, and I need recovery rooms. And he goes, well, we already got recovery rooms. The ER, it's already there. The rooms are there. And so they put a brand new MRI unit in there, put a brand new angio suite in there. And I did, I just moved my practice I got leasing space next to the hospital, and I just hung my shingle and started doing, it was professional services, it was just professional fees.
Right.
And that worked, pretty well for a while. But when the professional fee for UFE particularly got hit pretty hard, it became pretty clear that you had to have really access to the technical component
Mm-hmm.
to really make a go of it. And so that's when kind of morphed into, I found a hospital not far away, again, a small hospital. It was a joint venture hospital between Emory and the Adventist health system. And Adventist didn't have any other hospitals in Atlanta. They had a hospital about 45 minutes north of Atlanta, but they really needed the contracting and cachet for it to make a go of itself. So it partnered with Emory on this hospital, and I joint ventured an angio suite with the hospital. In fact, I had the only joint venture in the Emory system. Emory does not, as many hospitals, they don't like to share.
Right.
But they saw an opportunity, and it was a very profitable one for them. So we had a 50-50 joint venture on this angio suite, and it was a very nice arrangement. It was good for them. It was good for me. Basically, I got a certain amount based on fair market value for the interventions that I perform. And so I didn't have to worry about billing and collecting. It was a really nice arrangement. I could focus on clinical medicine. I leased an office, say, next to the hospital, and it was a very nice arrangement. The problem there was the two partners, Emory and Adventist Health System, butted heads all the time.
Yeah.
And eventually Adventist just left the Atlanta market. And so the hospital was closing. They announced it in July of 2014 that on Halloween they were going to be closed that year. So we had talked about having our own center, and this just, kind of forced the issue. And so in May of 2015, we opened the Atlanta Fibroid Center, and it's been tremendous.
And that was on your own though, like
Correct.
separate from any institution.
Yeah, totally on my own. I bought the space.
Just let me back up real quick before we jump into to that one. With these ventures where you were solo and you had space at these hospitals, how did you get around the exclusive contracts?
Well, yeah, I mean, the pseudo exclusive contracts were it was a big deal because any of the hospitals that I wanted to partner with would just say, well, the radiology group has exclusivity. But
right.
So that kind of was an impediment, and it remains an impediment to anybody trying to do this.
Yeah.
Fortunately, at the first hospital I worked at, that I was doing professional fee only at that small LTAC hospital.
Yeah.
It was the one hospital that this large group who basically does, all the radiology everywhere else in their system. At the time, there was this other older group that was there kind of by themselves, and the big group never bothered them because it was just small potatoes. But once I arrived, they lost their minds and increasingly made it difficult to work there. Be that as it may, it just, I found an even better opportunity with the joint venture.
Right.
There was a radiology group reading films, but there wasn't any interventional at the hospital. So again,
they had no argument there.
It was, we were symbiotic. They did their thing. I did my thing. In fact, they would, refer cases to me that they would otherwise have had to send out. So
right.
We were a big fish in a small pond in that situation. I mean, we had definitely favored nation status. It was very nice.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm always curious about that because going out solo myself, a couple of years ago, that was the biggest challenge, is getting privileges somewhere. And I had a space, but I wanted to be able to send patients in case of emergency. And, luckily I was able to find something. But, in these competitive markets, Atlanta, Dallas, it's incredibly hard.
Very difficult. It's unfortunate because they're only hurting other IRs. They're not preventing vascular surgeons or interventional cardiologists or interventional nephrologists or any other interventional physician. The only people they hurt are their own brothers and sisters in IR.
Yeah, it's goofy. Well, anyway, fast forward again back to 2015. You were like, you know what, I'm going to do this on my own. And I do want to talk about the importance of ownership, but even 2015, very few people were doing this. When did OEIS start? Do you remember what
About
year?
around that time.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
going to say.
it's about the time that OEIS was forming. So that was very helpful because you got introduced to people that were, doing this, that some of whom I knew of, and others I had never heard of. And it was very important to meet other people kind of doing it. It reinforced kind of what you're doing. And it also was helpful to kind of throw ideas and throw things around. And it continues to be a great resource. So I definitely encourage anybody that is interested in the outpatient interventional space. It doesn't have to be an OBL necessarily, but
Right.
in the outpatient world, definitely look into OEIS. It has it's a great meeting. There's a lot of really valuable information. You definitely learn a lot on the business side of things, which is, I mean, when I went out, I knew nothing about the business side of medicine or practice, and certainly have learned a lot over the years. But you don't have to go through somebody else's mistakes. You can take a shorter route.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's incredible for networking because I mean I met you there. My first year there, I think it was 2018. I met you there and a number of people. I met Franklin Yao, who's a local vascular surgeon here in Dallas, who was incredibly helpful and collaborative with me here in Dallas. And if I hadn't gotten OEIS, I might not have met him. So, it's a great crowd and lots of, like you said, a huge resource for anybody who's either out on their own or, looking, like you said, to just build more of an outpatient side to your practice. Doesn't have to be an OBL. But so what I want to ask you, because few people are doing this at that time, and you talked about how you had this, largely inpatient experience, but what was the main inspiration for starting your OBL? And not even just about the OBL, but like why just focusing on fibroid, women's interventions?
Well, I just so interested in fibroids and UFE, and it's a great story. It's one still after, UFE is not anything new, but
Right.
yet it's still every day, even, to this day, it's still new for a lot of people. And, I've kind of taken this as my life's work to try to educate physicians and the public about UFE because we continually get ignored. I mean, I saw something recently in one of the internet medical sites, Healthy something or other, and they had interviewed Linda Bradley, the chief of OBGYN, who I know at Cleveland Clinic, and they talk about the treatment options, and they go through all these options, and they completely left UFE off the option list. Or if it is listed, it's thrown in such a confusing heap of ablation and focused ultrasound and some of these other things that either aren't very good or they're very new. It's really a shame. UFE is one of the biggest medical breakthroughs, and I'd put it up there in significance with the pap smear and the mammogram for women.
Hmm.
And it's a real shame that most gynecologists to this day still won't mention it as an option, or if they do, they really give it a disservice. And there's a lot of urban myths about UFE
Right.
that I try to dispel every day, either through social media or in person or in some form or fashion, because we're way underutilizing UFE as a treatment option for women. And say we've got a great story, and I've molded my practice and my practice life around it, and hopefully can continue to do this for a while.
Yeah. So when you first were, hatched the idea and you're like, I'm going to open this outpatient center on my own, did you have any, anybody shooting your idea down saying, oh, you're never going to, that'll never work. You're never going to survive on just one procedure or.
Definitely, commonly. I mean, even as back in 2004 when I left, I was a full partner at probably the nicest private practice opportunity in Atlanta. And when I said I was going off on my own, they thought I was nuts. And that, I'll come, crawling back or,
Yeah.
when I started the OBL, I mean, people didn't think it was going to work. They said, most of these ventures just collapse. And in fact, I had to put $100,000 bond down on my equipment. So I had leased the equipment, and they added this extra 100,000 as a bond. And I was like, well, what is this for?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, frankly, you'll probably be closed in 6 months. So
Oh
this
my
is kind of
gosh.
an insurance policy. That was just fuel for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I think like most interventional people, when you tell them you can't do something, or you put them on the spot like that, I mean, that's just extra fuel. I mean,
Yeah, no, it totally is. I mean, haters are going to hate, and it does drive us, especially us having competitive natures, not only being physicians but being interventional radiologists. I think that we're to get where we are, we're fiercely competitive. So that kind of stuff does just fuel us.
and at the same time, I kept, thinking and reminding myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put a bet on somebody. I'm pretty comfortable putting a bet on myself. I mean,
Yeah.
I felt that I'm well trained. You try to do the right thing, and you have a pretty clear idea of stuff, and you focused on an area that you feel really comfortable in and confident about. Who better to bet on? I mean, and I think that's the way for a lot of the people that you come across at the OEIS meetings, and people that are out there doing it. They're doing it at a very high level. They're not cowboys. They're not doing something crazy. I think OBLs sometimes get kind of a bad rap because there's other specialties kind of doing some stuff across the lines that maybe they shouldn't be doing. You hear about certain specialties, doing cosmetic stuff kind of crazily and in kind of uncontrolled environments. But, the IRs that I know that are out there doing this stuff, I mean, as I say, they're doing it at a high level. They're doing it very safe. It's, the safety profile at these centers is outstanding. In fact, much safer than the hospital setting. I mean,
Right.
if you're confident in your skills and you're doing it in a very safe and thoughtful way, you can do it very successfully, which is great. But also you provide such an outstanding service to the community. I mean, particularly during the pandemic, we found, I mean, a lot of the hospitals stopped doing elective procedures. And so they weren't doing any elective hysterectomies or other fibroid surgeries and we stayed open. I mean, we were closed for a very brief amount of time, but we were an important safety valve and we were busy. And so these centers are really important. And with, the CMS ruling that came down in November to slash, essentially interventional radiology services reimbursement by 20%,
Right.
would have a devastating impact on these centers if this was allowed to stand. Now, hopefully, cooler heads will prevail here. We've already seen some movement on that CMS kind of softened it a little bit by making that a 4-year cut, that it would be like 9 to 10% maybe in the first year and then the rest over the next 3. But that's still,
Yeah.
you're still getting a significant cut. And we're hoping that there's been legislation. I met Gus Bilirakis, a representative from Florida, and they've got bipartisan. He's a Republican and he got his counterpart, a Democratic congressman from Illinois, for bipartisan legislation to try to, curb this, and hopefully we'll get something where it's
Reasonable.
not, reduce the impact here, because it's just really not fair to do this. I mean, it's kind of ironic that the one place that there's budget neutrality is when it comes to physician reimbursement. The rest of the government, there's no budget neutrality whatsoever. I mean, and our costs keep going up. I mean,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
it's really that's a very difficult situation that I hope will be corrected here soon.
Yeah. So on that same note, starting an OBL and running an OBL is very expensive. How did you fund your new space at the beginning? You mentioned buying the real estate. Was it bootstrapping, friends and family, business partners, bank loans? How did
Yeah,
you fund the
it
whole
was
thing?
some loans, but it was pretty much myself. I looked at the leasing options. In fact, we were very close to leasing space, and I'm glad I didn't do that. I mean, because I was worried that, you get this expensive equipment into a space and you're kind of, you're kind of stuck. You're beholden. I mean, our lease that I looked at that I almost, went with was 83 pages long. It was this incredible document that, what I couldn't do
Right.
essentially. And I just felt that if I was ever in there, that I'd be kind of stuck, and not be able, you can't move this equipment easily. And I found a really nice office space that was reasonably priced and very convenient right off the interstate. We wanted to be in a location that had, medical offices all around, which it did. It was right off the interstate. In fact, we're convenient to the two main interstates in Atlanta. And so the location was good. It was accessible. We had plenty of parking right in front. Patients pull right up to the front door. It's an awesome space.
Yeah.
We brought in designers, and we really wanted to design it for women. We wanted to do something, kind of different than the traditional office, medical space, because, frankly, we were serving women. And so we talked to women's groups on what they would like. Obviously quality was important to them, but really what kept resonating was privacy. That was really important. So when we designed the center, we designed it very private and for women. All of the patients have their own private room. It's not like this recovery corral with these thin drapes in between. We really wanted to make it nice for women to come there. I'm very glad we did that and listened to them.
And just curious, I mean, it sounds like you kind of went all out and didn't you didn't skip on the important things, obviously. And I've seen a mix of people trying to bootstrap out there, and I've tried to bootstrap, and you do feel like you're compromising things at times, but sometimes it's necessary when you can't or you don't want to take a big loan out. Do you have any advice for those who maybe can't afford the real estate or can't afford the heavy duty equipment right away? Is just to try and get there as fast as you can?
Yeah, that's a really tough question because, as I say, I wanted to make sure that I did it, and at the time, I wanted to make sure that no one could say that I was doing it on the cheap or I was
Right.
doing it that the care that they would get at our center and everything we were doing at our center was every bit as good, if not better, than the hospital. The
Right.
hospital was kind of, at the time, that was, the comparison. And so
Yeah.
I put a full angio suite in the lab. I was kind of afraid to do a C-arm. And
Yeah.
the C-arm technology obviously is a lot better now than 10 and 15 years ago. So, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't have even the impression that I was, doing it anything less than that could be done at a hospital. So it was full angio suite. Everything was, soup to nuts. I wanted to do it that way. But fortunately, I had been out for a while, and I'd been successful in this joint venture previously. And so I had capital that I could invest again in myself.
Right.
And so I did lease the equipment, but I did own the real estate. And I think that's really helpful because at some point, you're going to have an exit, and having the real estate is a nice exit strategy.
For sure.
And so you always have to think about the exit, even at the beginning when you're not really thinking about exit. You really do have to kind of think about that.
Yeah, for sure. And so kind of along those lines too, some people out there in the outpatient setting or, building OBLs, I know a couple of people who they really want to try and get everything they can, feeling like that's the best way to survive from the get-go in terms of procedures, saying I'm gonna try and do everything I can that I can do in the hospital safely in the OBL setting, whether it be an imaging guided biopsy, a thoracentesis, a paracentesis, even basic stuff, nephrostomy too, for example. And then you have people who are very niche like yourself, and I wanted to kind of ask you like how you feel about the importance of focusing on what what you're best at or what you're most passionate about, and why cutting out other procedures can help and not necessarily hurt you.
Well, I think you first have to look at yourself and there's like this, kind of a self-awareness kind of thing that you have to understand, what are you good at and what do you love to do? I remember this guy I used to practice with at my first job back, at Piedmont, in that practice right out of training. He used to say, all business isn't good business. So I do think you have to kind of remember it is a business. And so you have to do things that are going to, you have to have a business plan and kind of make sure that you're not just doing everything for the sake of doing it. I mean, sometimes you get into this trap where you want to kind of save everyone from surgery, and it doesn't matter like how much it costs or what kind of products you're using, but when it's your business, you have to look at costs, and you have to look at maybe not be able to do everything that you used to be able to do. And that's okay. I mean, you don't have to be everything to everybody. Now, some people want to do that, and that's fine. But I really like the fact that we're focused in this one area and we're really good at it and we do a lot of it. I think it does matter at the end of the day. People that do whatever it is, if they do a lot of it, it's going to be better to go to a place that does a lot of this stuff, whatever it is,
Right.
than somebody that's kind of dabbles in it. And you probably get differing opinions on that. But for me, it was very important. I really enjoy taking care of fibroid patients. And I know it comes through to patients. They can see the passion that I have to help them and the passion that I have for treating them and caring for them. And it's a true privilege. It really is a privilege to care for patients. And they can see that and they can feel it. And so when you're doing something that you're not either very good at, or you only do it a little bit, or maybe you're not even enthused about it, that will come through. And for me, there were certain interventions that I really didn't like to do that much. I mean, for me, it was dialysis work. It was for, some people, their whole practice is dialysis, and that's great.
Right.
If you're the best dialysis interventionalist, God bless you, and thank you for doing that, but that's not me. And so I think you have to kind of have a little self-awareness. What are you good at? What do you love to do? And then if you want to be in the OBL space or in the outpatient space, you're going to need a team of people that kind of believe your mission. For me, for us, it was people that wanted to care for women suffering with fibroids. And, that's not for everybody. And some people don't like the clinical responsibility that comes with that. And so you have to get your team of people and it's nursing and it's, business people. And it's, you've got to have a team of people that are going to kind of execute your mission. And we've been very successful at it. And I truly love going to work every day. I mean, I know it sounds really cliche, but I do. I love going to work. I have just great team of people, great clinical staff, great admin staff. It's a true joy coming to work versus I know a lot of colleagues that frankly are burned out and they're just worn out mostly from all the hospital bureaucracy and the insurance company. Fortunately, I have this oasis where I have a very efficient setup. I do cases every single morning and I walk to the other side of my OBL and I start seeing patients every afternoon, and it's a true joy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I agree with you. And I think it's also, I think you're very fortunate in that you've discovered and aligned both what you're good at and what you're really passionate about, because I think a lot of people do struggle with that. And it also takes years to determine that too, right?
That's absolutely correct. Because I get asked like by people that are in their training, I just want to go out and do an OBL like you did. How do I do that? And well, it's great. I mean, I hope a lot of the people listening to this will decide to go out into the outpatient space and will go out and develop OBLs, because we really need more people out there doing it. I think it's the way we get medicine back. That's our way to get medicine back from hospitals and hospital administrators. I mean, I'm at an age where I remember, the hospital being the doctors were in control of hospitals. The medical staff was in control of the hospital. In fact, they owned some of the hospitals, but today that's not the case at all. The hospitals are overrun by this exponential growth of hospital administrators that have really, in my opinion, ruined medicine, really beaten down or taken away the patient-physician relationship, we got to take that back. I mean, that's the greatest aspect of medicine, is caring for people. And I remember we talked briefly on the last back table, but I do think it's important to bring it up again, was the concept of Ikigai. I don't know if you remember that, but it's like this Venn diagram. It's like, the Japanese describe this kind of reason for being. And it's like this Venn diagram with 4 circles. It's like it's the intersection of what you love to do, what you're really good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And at the center of those 4 intersections is Ikigai. That's the kind of reason for being. And if you can find that spot, and I think I have, it's glorious. I mean, there are other intersections where if you find what you love and what you're good at, that's kind of passion. That's not quite yet to Ikigai. Or if you're what you can get paid for and what you're good at, that's kind of profession. If you intersect like what the world needs and what you love, that's kind of mission. There's different intersections, but if you can get all 4,
that's the sweet spot. Yeah.
That's the sweet spot. And
Nice.
that's what I've been able to do. And I hope others can do that, because to say that's how we get medicine back. When you get passionate physicians who love to do what they do, caring for people, that's what medicine's all about, not this other stuff that's going on.
Right.
And so I hope, other people can reach their Ikigai. That would be awesome.
I think that's solid advice for trainees and for people coming out, because I think it took me several years to kind of, and not that I've found my Ikigai, but, I like the balance I have between back table and clinical practice. And, it's, you see people in academics who have found that they really enjoy the balance of research and, clinical practice, and they get that 50-50 time, and they're in their kind of sweet spot. It's rare, but you do see, I do see colleagues that are still really satisfied with that.
And it's achievable. As you mentioned earlier, sometimes people think, well, I just can't do this, but you can, you really can do it if you really want to, and you have the drive to do it. And at the same time, you also have to take your time. That seems kind of maybe counterintuitive, but when I talk to trainees and so forth that want to do this, I tell them first, get the best training that you can get.
Right.
Really try to be the best interventional physician, the best clinical training, the best interventional skills, wherever that is. Get the skill set first. And then once you're a really good IR, then you can start thinking about some of these other things. But get the best foothold and foundation that you can.
Right. One last question I have for you. I saw you speak at the last OEI. I've seen you speak at a number of OEISs and SIRs, but most recently was September OEIS. Anything that you saw at the meeting that you're really excited about in terms of clinical innovations going forward? I know we had some recent reimbursement cuts, which you mentioned as well, but anything that you're excited about and not dreaded about?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm very excited about our specialty. I mean, I think we're the innovators. We're constantly coming up with different interventions to handle different problems. I'm excited about the, musculoskeletal intervention. You mentioned Sonny Bagla. I'm a big Sonny Bagla fan. I mean, I think he's done great work out there, and to see him talk about some of these interventions that he's doing, whether it's knee or shoulder, I think that opens up a whole host of possibilities. I think there's reason for cautious optimism on the obesity front and gastric embolization. Certainly prostate is making, good strides in that space. So, I think it's, good news for IR, and try not to listen to all the other noise. I mean, it's hard to not hear it, but, don't let it dissuade you from doing what you want to do and what out there is possible. And, I think that as a specialty, I think we're in the sweet spot of all specialties. I mean, I think, obviously I'm biased, but I do think we're in a perfect spot to do, OBLs and outpatient work, because everything is heading in the outpatient direction, and who better to be doing these things than us?
Yeah.